Now in BBC One Northern Ireland, Terry Wogan visits a few familiar places.
Tis maybe someday I'll go back to Ireland, if only at the closing of my day. At the opening lines to Galway Bay, a crowd-pleasing old Comalia that talks of the beauty of Galway Bay. I've already travelled the southern half of the country, the Ireland I knew from my youth. Now I'm headed north to a land I'm less familiar with. The border was a dangerous place. I'll be recalling Northern Ireland's unsung heroes.
He signed up with White Star and off he went on Titanic.
I want to see how much of that old Catholic prudery has survived. 3, 2, 1, go! I want to bathe in the glories of great Irish success stories.
It was interesting what happened the journey of traditional Irish dance. A little bit of flamenco, a little bit of Broadway.
Back in Dublin, I've agreed to subject myself to a grilling from Ireland's father confessor.
Did you decide that you do not believe in God or otherwise?
I spent the first 30 years of my life here in my own lovely country, and the next 40 years over the water in England. And as I set off on the second leg of my journey, I can't help reflecting on what the people of these two countries think of each other. The English took a very superior view. The Irish were not particularly intelligent. They believed in fairies. They believed in leprechauns. Just as indeed the Irish continue to have, in some cases, the view of the British of being cold, standoffish, superior in their attitudes. Well, since there's no great racial difference between the two peoples, it's obvious that the differences have been formed by history. This thought will be on my mind as I travel through the rest of the country. Galway is the starting point for this second leg. The seaside suburb of Salt Hill was as far north as we Wogans ever went when I was a lad. I spent many a holiday here with my family. Salt Hill, an endless promenade, as I remember it, up and down which the da, the ma, the brother, and myself used to walk. I have here a picture of us. Now, as you can see, that's myself with the old Dumbo ears. It's very brave of me to be standing out in a high wind because I could take off at any moment. And the brother behind, in a pullover that could only have been knitted by me granny. The da is smoking a fag out the corner of the mouth, but he's wearing a beret. Now, that was a sign that my father was on holiday, because normally my father, in his workaday life, would wear what I'm wearing, which is called a cap. Galway has always been known as a place for young people, and to this day it is full of young people. And one of the main reasons I resent it. A couple of miles down the coast from Salt Hill is the 1,000-year-old city of Galway. Always been the most international of Ireland's cities. It was visited by Christopher Columbus, and its medieval Spanish arch recalls a time when it was the country's principal port of trade with Spain and France. It's always had a uniquely independent spirit. 1,000 years on, Galway is the Republic's fastest growing city, and its arts festival is Ireland's answer to the Notting Hill Carnival and the Edinburgh Fringe, all wrapped up in one explosive package.
I think Galway is a very rich place. It's a tapestry of culture, fun, crack. It's big and it's beautiful and it's bashful and it's buzzing.
This big beautiful, bashful street parade will be watched by 80,000 people as it weaves its way through Galway's maze of medieval streets. It's staged by the theatre company Macnas. Its artistic director, Nolene Kavanagh. Over there on the wall, various representations. Is that a dancing bear?
It is a dancing bear.
Yeah.
And
also a bull with enormous horns.
Yes.
So what's all that about?
Well, basically, Terry, what you see here is a tapestry of inspiration that was the foundation for the work this year that inspired our artists in the company to make the sculptures.
Well, over the last 2 decades, Macnas has transformed street theatre in Ireland, making it the inclusive and visceral experience it is here. Macnas means joyful abandonment, something my education and upbringing didn't prepare me for. But like so many other Irish people, I was no stranger to the stage. When I was at Belvedere College in Dublin during the 50s, I was a keen member of the school's drama group. We put on countless Gilbert and Sullivan productions. Here in Galway, I've arranged to meet my old school friend Eugene Carney. He and I were the Olivier and Richardson of Belvedere College. Did you feel that at any time there when you're doing that you had a future on the stage?
Frankly, no. I did think you had. You had the style and you had the...
What you're saying is...
the je ne sais quoi.
What you're saying is I upstaged you.
Absolutely. This is the evidence of T. Wogan as the Grand Inquisitor.
Yeah. Even overacting.
In the gondolier.
Even overacting in the still photo.
You're kind of unrecognizable in that.
Yeah, I'm a little heavier since
Very
then.
well made up. You're very favourably reviewed here. Eugene Carney, I came first, and Terence Wogan gave us the 2 noble lords as Gilbert intended them to be, quite out of the ordinary in brainlessness and ineptitude, but superbly convinced of their own omnicompetence. Perhaps we should stop there. But anyway, that's...
yes, that's a
Iolante.
favourable review. So do you think that the Irish have a talent, have a performance gene in them more than anybody else? Or do they just think they have?
I think possibly a higher proportion of people in Ireland are given to getting up on a stage or singing or dancing, whatever talent they may have. Yeah, I think so.
Hear that? Now, in Galway, they're not afraid to take their talent out onto the streets. But I've been tipped off to look out for a reenactment of the execution of King Charles I in London in 1649. It was an event the city of Galway has a surprisingly strong connection with. It stars Oliver Cromwell, hardly Ireland's favourite Protestant, given what he did to the Catholics.
I, Oliver Cromwell, accuse Charles Stuart, King of England, of treason!
The prisoner is King Charles I, complete with flowing locks and a bevy of women protesting his innocence.
This king has shown himself to be an enemy of our parliament and is hereby sentenced to death. Axeman, do your duty!
But the royal executioner refuses. The hunt is on for a replacement. Up steps a new recruit, ready and willing to do the job for a handsome fee.
Axeman, off with his head!
It turns out the anonymous executioner was a Galway man. And this very building, now the King's Head pub, was his reward. Jonathan Gunning.
Yes.
I may say, you played that role of executioner as if you were born to it.
Thank you. You know what? The funny thing is, in a way I was. And the man that got to do the execution was a man called Richard Gunning. And my name is Jonathan Gunning.
You're the direct descendant of the man who did the regicide.
Well, we could say that. And I'm very good with a hatchet. But in a way, you're responsible as well, Mr. Wogan.
What have we got here?
So we have here a copy of the death warrant from 1649.
Of Charles I.
Of Charles I. And there are 59 signatories. And right here is a signature of Sir Wogan.
Thomas Wogan.
Thomas Wogan. Very, very good. We have his name right here. Thomas Wogan.
I'm as guilty of regicide as your ancestor.
But his name was Sir Thomas Wogan, and of course you're a sir as well, so clearly it works out quite well for you.
Yes, it does, yeah.
So I think maybe you could keep going. Just keep it up and we could work together.
Kill a king, become a knight.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. From Galway, city of culture and vitality, we travel northwards to the beautiful county of Sligo. We're heading for a deserted beach, miles from anywhere. Ireland was a very prudish place to grow up in, and I remember as a child, when you went for a dip in the sea, Catholic modesty demanded you reveal as little flesh as possible. Today, these golden sands are going to be alive, with 200 or more ladies putting 2 fingers up to Irish prudery. Now, unfortunately, I can't be there. Today is the day I have to do my radio show, Weekend Wogan, back in London. But I still hope to be able to make my little contribution to the dip in the nip.
I'm not sure that the dip could have happened even 5-10 years ago in Ireland. For example, I used to go to Donegal Beach for holidays when I was a kid, and everybody, particularly the adults, you just kept yourself well wrapped up. If you went in for a swim, you literally went down to the water, got in for a swim, came out again. There was no real freedom of it. And what I found last year when I did this, when I organised this event for the first time, I actually had to remind people that it was a fundraiser because it became about something else. It became about a sense of liberation. Public nudity in Ireland is actually still illegal. In many ways, I suppose it's an Irish solution to an Irish problem. The Gardaí come along and help us make sure that everybody's privacy is protected, when in fact they should be arresting us. And my father last year was afraid that I was going to get arrested over this. But because we're not setting out to cause offence, that's the key thing. And because we do make sure that it's kept private, it's okay. So everybody takes it in the spirit in which it's intended.
This is a very, very special day in County Sligo, in the west of Ireland. There are a fine body of women, even as we speak, and they're there on behalf of a breast cancer charity fundraising event. And they call it the Dip in the Nip. And it's up to us to launch them. So, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. 3, 2, 1, go!
My mother's 90th birthday, and she has breast cancer, and she didn't want presents, she wanted people to do things for charity, so this is my birthday present for her.
My mum passed away from cancer 3 years ago, so I came to support that cause, you know.
Initially we said we'd do it for a bit of crack, but unfortunately our brother died of cancer last month, so now we're doing it for him, and I'm sure he's looking down now and laughing his head off.
Onwards, relentlessly onwards. Past Sligo town, we encountered the extraordinary peak of Ben Bulben, formed by glaciers during the Ice Age. Looking down on it, it has the appearance of a slice of ripe brie, its sides falling away to the ground below. The north face of Ben Bulben is reputed to be one of the most dangerous climbs in Ireland. And the flat top of the mountain, one of the most isolated and inhospitable places in the country. An American aircraft crashed here during World War II, said that some of its remains can still be found on that wind-swept plateau. Before we know it, we're in Donegal, courtesy of Dave, my loyal driver. Now, Donegal is the most northerly county in the Republic of Ireland. In fact, it's more northerly than any county in Northern Ireland. And we're hoping to cross the border between the Republic and Northern Ireland. I have memories of several years ago crossing the border, and it was no joke then. There were watchtowers, there were soldiers in the watchtowers armed, there was barbed wire. And the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland was a dangerous place. Now the watchtowers are gone, the soldiers and the barbed wire are distant memories. You'd be hard-pressed to say exactly where the border is. And all of a sudden, you see ghosts from the past, like this disused guardhouse. Security has been replaced by commerce, as countless bureaux de change compete to exchange euros for pounds, and road signs change from kilometres to miles.
We're now crossing the border. You are now in Derry, in Northern Ireland.
So we've gone from kilometres to miles. We've gone from a country that's enthusiastically a member of the EU to another country that is perhaps not quite as enthusiastic.
Correct.
Just over the border is Northern Ireland's second biggest city, known by two very different names, Derry and Londonderry.
Good morning, Jerry. Michael Anderson here, spinster of this parish. The number to ring.
I've asked my old friend Jerry Anderson, the voice of BBC Radio Foyle, to explain the significance of these two names to me and you.
You'd be stopped at night, you see, and somebody would say, "Where are you going?" And you'd say, "Derry," wondering if it was right. Because if you say Derry, it means that you're probably a Catholic. But if you say Londonderry, you're most definitely a Protestant. So he knows instantly what religion you are, which is important here during the Troubles.
It's well over a decade since the peace agreement was signed, but the River Foyle still acts as a kind of no man's land, separating the Catholics on the west side from the Protestants on the east, with just one bridge connecting the two communities in the city centre. The old walled city of Derry is a powerful reminder of what this is all about. The walls were built by English and Scottish Protestants to keep the native Catholics out. Jerry brings me here to explain how the time bomb of nearly 4 centuries of anti-Catholic discrimination was finally ignited.
It was left to fester. It was never sorted out.
It all began in 1947, and Catholics started receiving secondary education for the first time. This was the very first generation of Catholics to be made aware of how unfairly they'd been treated over the centuries.
The guys who had normally not got an education said, "Hold on a minute, I've been treated here like a second-class citizen." By the time people who are 12 years old get to university, it will be 1959, perhaps 60. They will leave university when they are 21. They will see around a little bit, they'd think about it. They'll be 25 or 26. By the time they realize they have to do something about this place, oh look, it's 1969. Time to start the Troubles.
Down below the old city, a series of murals tell the story of the Troubles, and most famously of Bloody Sunday. On the 30th of January 1972, a civil rights march through the city ended in tragedy, and 13 demonstrators were shot dead by the British Army. The 14th died later. They were all Catholics. It took 38 years for the truth to be unraveled, and in 2010, an investigation led by Lord Savile concluded that the deaths were unjustified and unjustifiable.
The Savile report was the first time that anything has happened that has been actually really positive, because somebody was coming out and saying, you were right, that the people were innocent. We believe you now. We didn't believe you before, but you were right. And it gave the city a tremendous boost of self-confidence. And everybody just went, thank you. That's all we want.
The Savile report's conclusions sent a wave of hope and optimism through the city, as well as giving a further boost to existing initiatives to help pull the next generation of Catholics and Protestants together in this town. One of the most successful is the Foyle Cup. Now one of Europe's biggest youth football tournaments, this match between Derry City boys and St. Kevin's from Dublin is taking place in the middle of the Cregan housing estate on the outskirts of Derry. The Foyle Cup attracts top under-18 players from throughout the United Kingdom, Ireland and Europe, and it's become a favourite for talent spotters from the big football clubs. Not only that, but the tournament's given Derry's next generation something else to think about.
Foyle Cup's one of the best competitions in Europe. There's Premiership teams in this. Wolves is, I think, playing under 16s and stuff like that. And there's American teams. There's actually a CET Spain is playing in our age group, under 19s. Like, so a lot of clubs from a lot of places in the world know about the competition. Worst of the troubles would have been before us, like, but to be honest, it has died down a lot. I'd say a lot of it has down to do by playing football, like, because they're all mixing with Catholic and Protestants, like, so people tend to forget about it. Like.
The other great initiative is the Peace Bridge. Work has begun on a pedestrian bridge across the River Foyle to link the two halves of the centre of the city, east and west, Protestant and Catholic. The new structure is a 235-metre footbridge supported by two curved suspension structures. It's been described as a handshake across the Foyle. It will be the biggest single regeneration project in Derry City for over 30 years. Back in the good old days when I was chained to my desk at BBC Broadcasting House doing Wake Up to Wogan on Radio 2 every morning, I'd hand over the pastoral care of my audience to a controversial Irish Catholic priest called Father Brian Darcy.
Very good morning, dear Brian.
You remember his wise words, I'm sure.
People are unreasonable, illogical and self-centred. Love them anyway.
Every week, Father Brian presented a 2-minute programme on my show called Pause for Thought.
So, you're very welcome, Terry.
In which he disseminated words of wisdom from the monastery here at St. Gabriel's Retreat.
Mostly we want it to be a welcoming place.
Now he's the rector of the monastery here. And Father Brian is regarded as a rebel in the Catholic Church, which is why he doesn't always wear priestly clothes. After all these years, I'm hoping to see the very place from which Father Brian broadcast to the nation. Well, I always assumed you'd have a cell.
Well, here's a cell.
Is this going to disappoint me now? Are there going to be? Is there a bed of rushes and things?
Well, it's a plank. This is my room.
Your simple bedroom.
My simple bedroom.
And also, what have you got here?
And this is a lovely red light, which should remind you of something.
Yeah.
For 20 years, on Pause for Thought, usually on a Monday morning, I joined you, so this little red light was burning outside the door.
It's of no religious significance whatsoever?
Only that Terry Wogan broadcast at the other end. And I sat down here, put on my headphones, and spoke to the nation, to 8 million people from this little desk, and then went back to bed.
I get up at 20 past 5 every morning, traipsed into London, into Broadcasting House. You
got out of the bed,
in the pyjamas,
turned around into the pyjamas, and said, "Good morning, Terry."
There are times when we let the world get the better of us, and there are times when we let depression blind us to the good things all around us.
Well, outside of his radio broadcasts, Father Brian works in a troubled world. In 2009, the Murphy Report confirmed that there'd been a number of cases of child abuse by Catholic priests in Dublin from the 1970s. And this has seriously undermined people's confidence in the Catholic Church. Father Brian has been a very public critic of the way the Vatican has handled these revelations.
The present Irish Catholic Church is in a complete mess. The Murphy report discovered there were 11 abusive priests in one diocese. I was on the Council of Priests in Dublin during that time, and it was never mentioned. And I have to say, it shook me to my roots, not just in priesthood, but in faith itself, that so much could have been hidden. And in the middle of all of that, you had abusive priests who joined the priesthood so that they could abuse children. You know, that's the fact of it. And what is even more difficult for the people to understand is not just the abusive priests, but that these people could be hidden, enabled, changed, and in turn helped to abuse more by those in authority who should have known better. And it has to be said, the Irish people, I think their faith has been shattered.
To seek refuge from the crisis the Church finds itself in, Father Brian is drawn back to a time before organised religion, to a time before Catholic and Protestant churches.
So, Brian, tell me why you brought me to this idyllic spot, Lough Erne.
I used to be with you in the programme and you say, where are you speaking from this morning? I say, I'm looking out across the idyllic Lough Erne, and you never believe me. And so now you see how idyllic this place is. All those word pictures that I gave you, they fade into nothing when you actually see the beauty of it. And I would have to say that in the last 20 years, it is this scene, this what you're looking at now, and this man, Pat Lundy, in the boat, who has kept me reasonably sane. I can't say it, I can't claim sanity.
So you'd be madder than you are even at present
I
if
would
it
be
wasn't for this lake?
Terry, I would be unbearably mad if it
So what do? You come out here and reflect, or just sit and think of nothing?
I think both are the same thing. This has always been, it's a sacred thing, it's a Celtic thing. It's here thousands of years. It's here long before Christianity. And the Christians used this in the very beginning. Right back to St. Malash and Devenish, the famous Columbanus of Iona, all of those came on this lake and reflected on it. This was the kind of place that bred the island of saints and scholars. Now, what it does to me is, somehow or another, once you get into this, there's a kind of a spirituality, you know, that's missing everywhere else in Ireland. The tension, the stress of the modern world, and particularly the modern Catholic Church, rains out of you, and you get filled with a spirituality that is far more ancient and beautiful than anything the religion has to offer.
Father Brian takes his inspiration from the early Christian fathers. And with people's faith in the Catholic Church at an all-time low in Ireland, it needs ambassadors like Father Brian Darcy more than ever before. I'm headed for Belfast, capital of Northern Ireland. Now, when I was in my teens and 20s, you have to understand that people who lived in Dublin very rarely crossed the border to go to Belfast, and vice versa. In fact, so disconnected are they, they've only just completed the final section of the new motorway that links the two cities. If I went to Belfast at all, it was to play rugby for my school team from Belvedere College in Dublin. In those days, the city was probably best known for its shipyards, which were owned and run by Harland and Wolff, once the biggest shipbuilders in the world. They employed over 30,000 people here on Queen's Island, almost all of them Protestant. Nicknamed Samson and Goliath, these monstrous yellow cranes were symbols of Harland and Wolff's global supremacy. Back in their heyday, Harland and Wolff were responsible for the creation of the most notorious ship of all time. The Titanic was the largest passenger ship in the world when she set sail on her maiden voyage to New York on the 10th of April, 1912. 4 days later, she struck an iceberg and sank and more than 1,500 people drowned. What is much less well known is that 22 of the victims were local Ulstermen. Their lives are quietly commemorated by the Titanic Memorial in the grounds of Belfast's City Hall. The story of one, Thomas Miller, was typical of the ordinary Irishman who had had the misfortune to be on the ship when it sunk.
Is that a picture of the man himself?
That's him. He was only 33 when he died, so he was still a young man with his whole future ahead of him.
Susie Miller is the great-granddaughter of Thomas Miller.
Thomas Miller worked here in Harland and Wolff as an engine fitter, and for the 3 years that it took to complete Titanic, he was watching the ship getting bigger and bigger, and he started to think about the sort of places it would be going and the opportunities that it would offer. So he really set his mind to improving himself, and he went and studied to become a seagoing engineer, a marine engineer. Just 3 months before Titanic was due to sail, his wife died. So he was left with these 2 young children, and he wanted to give them the best start in life. So he signed up with White Star, and off he went on Titanic, with the idea of going to America, basing himself there, and then once he had himself organised, sending for those 2 boys.
Those 2 boys were Susie's grandfather and great-uncle. Not only had they lost their mother, but with their father on the Titanic, they were about to lose him too.
As a deck engineer, part of his responsibility was for the mechanisms which controlled the lifeboats, the davits. So he, in all likelihood, was helping to get people away, was working those lifeboats and getting them lowered down. So at least he was doing something to help others.
Probably no room for him on the boats.
No, there wouldn't have been. No, crew would have been expected to do their duty until the end. And this poor man who thought that he was doing good for his children, in the end, he left them orphaned.
He left them something else as well, didn't he?
He did. Well, right here where we're standing would have been the last place that my grandfather saw his father before he sailed off on Titanic. And before he left, my great-grandfather took my 5-year-old grandfather to one side and gave him 2 new pennies and said, "Don't spend those until I see you again." Of course, because he never did see his son again, my grandfather kept those all his life and never did spend them.
1912.
Yes, yes, George V is on them.
The sinking of the Titanic was one of the darkest days in the history of Belfast shipyards. And yet, that ill-fated ship has given its name to a massive project to regenerate this entire Docklands area. Belfast Shipyards is now known as the Titanic Quarter. The irony of it. Like London's Docklands, it's going to include a brand new financial and business district and a major new museum devoted to the memory of one of the 20th century's greatest tragedies. This marvellous building, once the world headquarters of Harland and Wolff, is destined to become the Titanic-themed hotel. But before the developers move in, I want to have a look at the old place. Once inside, there are echoes of more gracious, elegant times. The whole building feels like a glamorous transatlantic liner with grand stairways and aristocratic sanitary ware. Without doubt, though, the pièce de résistance is this: the drawing offices. There are 2 of them, and it was here that a sizable proportion of the 20th century's greatest ships were designed and drawn.
When I can walk into these drawing offices and I can see people, I can put names to people, where they sat, where they were based. There's a tinge of sadness to see the building in its state now.
I'm joined by retired workers John Higgins and Rodney McCullough.
You were here in the 50s and the 60s, that's when you worked here. So it must have been a tremendous hive of industry.
It was in the 50s and the 60s and at the tail end of the 40s, there were 51,000 people employed by the Harland and Wolff Group.
Oh.
And here in Belfast, we had 31,000. So it was a massive empire with branches in Liverpool, Southampton, London, 3 shipyards on the Clyde, 3 engineering works on the Clyde. So it was all controlled from this base here in Belfast.
What kind of people were they to work for?
Very disciplined workforce. Everything was very disciplined, even down to going to the toilet. Back in those days, you didn't clock in. There were none of the fancy systems that they are today. You had a little block of wood called a board, a wooden board with a number stamped across the top, and you called that in the morning from the timekeeper, and you threw it into the timekeeper at night, and that was the time recording system. So this board became a very critical piece of infrastructure. And when you went to the toilet, you used this board. And there was a man in the toilet, and when you went in, you gave him your board, he looked at your number, he recorded your time in, and in 7 minutes, he came and he rattled the door to tell you it was time to get out. So consequently, as a result of that, toilets were not known as toilets in Harlan and Wolff. They were widely known as minutes, because you only got 7 minutes to do whatever you had to do.
Absolutely right, too. We've all become too soft. 7 minutes should be plenty of time. Sadly, though, time ran out for the shipyards. Less than 50 miles south of Belfast, Armagh is one of Northern Ireland's 5 border counties. It's one of the most fertile and beautiful parts of the country, but its beauty belies its recent history. During the 3 decades of the Troubles, around 250 people were killed in South Armagh, many of them British soldiers and police officers. At that time, South Armagh was known as Bandit Country. Not anymore. St. Bridget's Accordion Band has members not only from both sides of the border, but from both Catholic and Protestant backgrounds. Given the size of the place, most of the village seems to be in the band.
How is it that in an area that really only has about 200 people in it, you have 80 accordionists, not all here today, but, you know, playing the drums, playing all sorts of instruments. How did you manage to generate that kind of enthusiasm?
A lot of hard work, but it all started back in 1991, Terry, where there was not really going on in this locality. And there was a lady from across the border who joined here with 4 people, including my brother and sister, and her own 2 daughters. And they decided that they would start music lessons.
Why did you pick accordions?
I think it's in Ireland as a whole. It's a great instrument. It's easy to listen to. It's not easy to play, but it's very, you know, and it's affordable.
And you've got all these people playing accordions or playing drums or whatever. And of course, you become internationally famous.
Yes.
You win competitions all over Europe, don't you?
Yes. We've won the All-Ireland 3 years in a row. We've won 5 All-Irelands altogether. And we're currently the Ulster champions for a junior band. So we have a senior band and a junior band.
Well, it's an extraordinary tribute to the fact that in this tiny area, and in an area, I think, Bridge, that has certainly been embattled. I mean, you've had your share of violence here.
Yes, we have indeed. I mean, this area alone, this borderland area, would be a focal point throughout history. Obviously, economically and politically, the border would be viewed as legitimate, but culturally, you know, the only difference is between here and the south is, you know, the post boxes are green down there and red up here, and you know, music is, there's no line on a map with music.
You know, I think I could grow to love the accordion. And in Jonesborough, you'd better. Within minutes, we're across the border, back into the Republic. Now, I know the Irish like to think they're the only people that ever had a history, but they do have a lot of it. And the Boyne Valley is where it's at its richest. Brú na Bóinne is one one of the most spectacular megalithic sites in Europe. It's a chamber of tombs that's older than the pyramids of Egypt. And these strange earthworks on the hill of Tara mark the seat of Laera, High King of Ireland, and legendary adversary of St. Patrick. Nearby is a statue of St. Patrick himself. Keep an eye on that shamrock. At some point in the 1st century AD, St. Patrick won an argument with the Druids, and the old king gave him free rein to bring Christianity to this pagan isle. The event that the Boyne Valley is best known for is the Battle of the Boyne, the only significant battle in European terms ever fought in Ireland. Back in 1690, the Protestants and the Catholics fought to the death for Irish rule. 30,000 Catholics, led by King James II and his Jacobites, marched up from the south. 40,000 Protestant troops, led by King William, or King Billy, as he's become known, headed down from the north. The armies met here, on opposing sides of the River Boyne, but the Catholics never stood a chance. Historian Turtle Bunbury explains why.
Several reasons why. One army won, which ended up being King Billy, and one of them is that they were outnumbered. It's pretty obvious. Secondly, King Billy's men were quite veterans of all the wars in Europe, whereas King James's Jacobites were 17,000 of them were farmers from round and about who hadn't really fought before. And thirdly, lately it's been discovered that the brandy rations arrived on the morning of the battle itself for the Jacobite forces, and a lot of them got stuck into it that day.
Are you sure this is not a part of Irish mythology?
I am quite sure. A diary has recently been located and added that.
And the Jacobites were then driven down to Limerick.
Finally defeated at Limerick. That was the end of the Jacobites.
That the Battle of the Boyne saw the end of Catholic rule in Ireland.
It was the last hurrah, definitely.
The drink gets blamed for nearly everything in Ireland. But what is clear is that Catholics were outnumbered and finally outdone. After driving nearly 2,000 kilometres around the old Emerald Isle, I'm back in Dublin. When I was 15, 1 hour ahead of the posse, we Wogans moved here from Limerick, where I'd spent my childhood. 12 years later, I made Helen Joyce the happiest woman in the planet by marrying her. By that time, I was speaking to the great Irish public as a continuity announcer, no less. Like most city dwellers, Dubliners are a breed apart. They're known by country people as Jackeens, and Dublin's always been seen as the most English city in Ireland. And so, the Jack in Jackeen refers to the Union Jack. The diminutive een makes them Little Jacks. That's country people for you. And by the way, they're called culchies. But I'm not going to get into that. I left Dublin in a marked manner for London in 1969, but this is the city that made me, so I suppose I could call myself a Jackeen. Is there any real difference, though, between the English and the Irish now? Well, David Norris is a senator here in the Irish Parliament. His father was English, his mother was Irish. I'm just trying to identify the differences, the similarities between the Irish and the British.
I think we're actually very similar in a lot of ways. They have a slightly different sense of humour, I think. But we are remarkably similar genetically, and we're all mixed up. And if you look at Her Majesty the Queen, a woman I greatly admire, she is a direct descendant of both Brian Boru and Hugh O'Neill through her mother, who was so gloriously Irish. You know, fag in the mouth, gin in the handbag, hunting on the nags, fairies in the kitchen, absolutely wonderful. And a woman of whom Adolf Hitler said, the most dangerous woman in Europe. What an accolade, what a gal. I think that was wonderful.
Not surprisingly, then, there aren't many differences between the Irish and the English any longer. Most of us are a mixture of the two. Of course, like me, a lot of Irish don't live in Ireland any longer.
There are more of us in England than there are in Ireland. I'm all in favour of bringing people together as much as possible rather than fomenting division. Celebrate difference. That's wonderful. And I'm glad there are still people doing Morris dancing and rolling cheeses down the hillside. I mean, those are terribly English things. I mean, Irish people wouldn't do them. We have our own idiocies.
We may not roll cheeses or Morris dance, but here in Ireland, we're taught to dance as though our lives depended on it. Riverdance is now a world-famous stage show, but I'm proud to say I was there at the very beginning. Before Michael Flatley and Jean Butler went on to become household names.
Good grief. That brought the folk memories out. Small hairs rising in the back of every Irishman's neck.
By anybody's standards, it was dramatic, it was dynamic. It probably changed Irish dancing forever. For 15 years, Riverdance has been a global, blockbusting stage show, and now it's back in Dublin, rehearsing for another sellout season at the Gaiety Theatre. I've come to meet my old friend Moya Doherty, one of the original creators of Riverdance. I can only tell you what an impact it had on a simple old presenter like myself. In terms of television, in terms of drama, there was nothing to touch it, and it was you that started. I mean, where did you get the idea? How did you get the idea?
I needed to do something as a producer that wasn't song-based. I wanted to present dance. We don't have a history of ballet. We don't have a history of contemporary dance. So really, just to reach back into our very rich culture was the best place to go. And I think marrying that with these two extraordinary Irish-American dancers, Michael Flatley and Jean Butler, brought an athleticism to Irish dance because they were sort of first and second generation Irish-Americans. And it was interesting what happened the journey of traditional Irish dance, which was, you know, hands by the side and,
You wouldn't show the knickers?
Yeah, just, the Catholic Church had a very close hold on it all. But obviously those Irish Americans were much freer, and they introduced, I suppose it was the fusion of different cultures, a little bit of flamenco, a little bit of Broadway, and that driving, building music.
Well, with the new show just about to open, rehearsals are at fever pitch. Irish dancing has been transformed by Riverdance, and nowadays every parent in the country is desperate to see their progeny clicking their heels and stomping about like mad things on the stage. Moya and I look in on the next generation of river dancers in the making.
So we're going to do St. Patrick's Day now with all the dancers, which is a very traditional dance, and it's known worldwide again, and each dancer will have learnt this dance on their ranks all the way up.
Susan Guinness was one of the dancers on that very first performance of the fledgling river dance during the Eurovision Song Contest. So there you were, that wonderful night.
Yeah, long time ago.
What did you feel at the end of that night? Did you think that something rather extraordinary had happened?
Absolutely. When we danced at first, we had our rehearsals, and we always knew it was fantastic. It was a great camaraderie between everybody. But then when we finished the dance that night, there was that, and then the applause,
the extraordinary intake of breath.
Absolutely, and it was brilliant for us. We were very young at the time. We were only, I was 16 at the time, so I was only a baby myself, so it was brilliant. Great experience.
In many ways, Riverdance was the touch paper that lit the beginning of a new Ireland. Proud of its heritage, confident about its future. From the mid-90s, Dublin became the epicenter of a massive economic boom dubbed the Celtic Tiger. Lured by attractive tax incentives and compliant banks, the speculators and developers descended on the capital, built glass and steel palaces up and down the Liffey. But with the crash of 2007, The smart money moved out. The boom was over. But for a while there, at the beginning of the new millennium, Dublin felt like the most affluent city in Europe. 40 years earlier, I took my first staggering steps in broadcasting here in Dublin, alongside RTE's Gay Byrne. Gay's become the most famous man on Irish television and radio, but that's after I'd left the country, you know. For more than 37 years, he hosted The Late Late Show, the world's longest-running chat show. It's been the biggest catalyst for social change this country has seen. Landmark editions featuring lesbian nuns, women's rights, and an AIDS special showing how to put on a condom have all helped to bring Ireland and the Irish into the 21st century. Would you say that Ireland's changes have been considerable?
When you think that people walked out of the studio of the Late Late Show in Montrose because we were discussing the possibility of divorce being legalized in Ireland. We were only discussing the possibility of it, and people walked out in disgust and outrage. We were speaking about contraception. We were speaking about gayness. And that was just the reaction to that, even discussing it on the Late Late Show, was so appalling in the view of so many.
When was that? The 60s, 70s?
That would have been well into the 70s, and even into the 80s. And now when you see gay partnerships being hunky-dory and contraception, of course, no longer a point of discussion, neither is divorce. And the ceiling didn't fall in, and the sky, heaven, whatever. Nothing happened, but people were roused to apoplexy about even the discussion.
To keep Gay going in his declining years, RTE have given him a new series where he pins well-known Irish people to their seat with personal and penetrating questions until they cry for mercy. It's called, modestly, The Meaning of Life.
What's it all about? Why are we here? Is there a God?
Gay has talked to people like Edna O'Brien, Brenda Fricker and Gabriel Byrne, and now it's my turn. Foolishly agreed to succumb to his iron will. I'm beginning to regret it already.
It's very important that I do my best for this.
Gay is known for going for the jugular.
I don't know why you're actually wasting tape doing this.
We've got enough makeup on.
We do. Are we about to call the master?
Would that noise not be too much, no?
What a man. Because when you're talking, for some extraordinary reason, particularly when it's not going very well, you do get a bit dry.
Okay, let's go, thank you.
And I don't anticipate this going very well.
Action.
Good evening to you and welcome again. And our guest this time is Sir Terence Wogan. And good day to you, sir, and thank you very much indeed for joining us.
The pleasure is mine.
This programme is called The Meaning of Life.
And a fairly portentous title.
Indeed it is. Perhaps a little overreaching in its ambition. Nonetheless, what do you think life has as a meaning? What do you think the meaning of life is?
My life, if you're asking me about my life and the meaning of my life, it's been absolutely wonderful. I've had the most wonderful time. I've had a lovely family. I've had a loving wife. I've had success in the material world. I've done something I wanted to do. I've had an ideal life. So I can only tell you what it means to me, which is happiness.
Your overreaching feeling then would be one of gratitude.
Absolutely.
But not to anybody or anything in particular.
You could say fate, luck. Yeah, but I can't believe that somebody out there, beyond the clouds, particularly picked me out to have a good time.
In the end, did you decide that you do not believe in God or otherwise?
Yeah, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in heaven. And I don't believe in hell. I know it's arrogant, as I said before. Better men than me have believed in God. Far more intelligent people than me. But at this stage of my life, let me put it that way, that I can't accept the logic
Okay, last question. Suppose it's all true, what the Jays told you in the Crescent and in Belvedere. Suppose it's all absolutely true and they were right. And you get up there to wherever. When you meet that great Director General in the sky, what will you say to him?
I look around a bit and I think I'd say, where am I? And then, you're having me on. I don't believe this. But I'll take it if it's there.
Won't we all, dear? Won't we all?
It's up for discussion. There may be no heaven, there may be no hell, but somewhere in between the two here in Dublin, there is a kind of immortality, if you're famous enough. Because the city is full of statues. They celebrate most of Ireland's good and great, but most of them have been given rhyming nicknames of such rudeness, I couldn't possibly disclose them here. So, Oscar Wilde is the person on the crag. James Joyce is the person with the stick. And Molly Malone is the person with the cart. The Irish put you on a pedestal only to knock you off. So they can bide their time before they erect one of me. Thank you very much. Besides, I can't think of anything too rude rhyming with microphone. Can you? The people of Ireland have always been its most important resource. They've also been the country's main export. But the thing about the Irish is that whether they're in Chicago or Riga or London, they remain Irish to the core. And the ones that have stayed in the old country have helped redefine and strengthen the culture. Ireland and Irishness are probably one of the world's best-known national identities. Because of centuries of emigration, there are about 80 million people around the world who can claim an Irish birthright. That makes us one of the most widely dispersed nations throughout the globe. Which reminds me, the other thing about the Irish is that every so often they do like to come home. This is Phoenix Park, Dublin. Probably the biggest walled park in Europe. 5 square miles of grass and trees. And in the middle of it, Áras an Uachtaráin, which is Gaelic for the presidential palace, where the President of Ireland sits. And in that top left-hand window, you'll see a light. And that's a permanent light. That's a light to welcome back the millions of Irish who've left this country. As I've done myself, and as I have to do again. Okay, Dave, take us away.
Now, if you missed this or the first episode of Terry Wogan's Ireland, you can catch up with it by logging on to the BBC iPlayer.